Find the derivative of f of t equals the secant of 3t divided by 9t minus 1, then evaluate f prime of pi over 3. F of t here is the quotient of two functions. Secant of 3t divided by 9t minus 1. The derivative will therefore use the quotient rule. The derivative, f prime of t, will be the derivative of the numerator. The derivative of secant is secant tangent. We will leave the inside of those alone, so they will both be 3t, and then times the derivative of the inside of the trig function, so the derivative of 3t, which is a 3 to complete the chain rule. That's the derivative of the numerator times the denominator left alone, minus the numerator left alone, so secant of 3t, times the derivative of the denominator. Derivative of 9t minus 1 will be a 9. All of this divided by the denominator quantity squared. Now this numerator I'm going to rewrite by moving the 3 and the 9t minus 1 to the front, these two. And we still have the secant of 3t and the tangent of 3t. It's customary to write the constant first, then the power function, then the trig functions. And for that same reason, I'm going to move the 9 to the front in the next term, so it'll be negative 9 and secant of 3t. All of this divided by 9t minus 1 quantity squared. F prime of t is equal to, the next thing we can do is factor the numerator. We have a 3 and a 9, so we can factor 3 out of there. So I know I can at least bring a 3 out. But it turns out we also have a secant of 3t in both of those, so I can factor out a secant of 3t. So I will take both those out. Now for this first term, we took out the 3 and the secant of 3t, so there's what we should have left. 9t minus 1 times tangent of 3t. And for the second term, we took out a 3, which will leave a 3, and we took out the secant of 3t. And there's what we should have left. It's just a negative 3. So negative 3. And then all of this is divided by that denominator, 9t minus 1 quantity squared. Now the 9t minus 1 in the numerator cannot cancel with that 9t minus 1 squared in the denominator because it needs to factor out. And it can't factor because it's only in this term, it's not in this term. And therefore it's not going to factor. And until you can factor, you will not be able to cancel it. So there's as simple as we can make the derivative f prime of t. The next thing to do is evaluate f prime of pi over 3. F prime of pi over 3 means to plug a pi over 3 in for each of the t's. This will give us 3 secant of 3 pi over 3 times the quantity of 9 pi over 3 minus 1 times the tangent of 3 pi over 3 minus 3. All of this divided by 9 pi over 3 minus 1, and then quantity squared. So we have 3 times the secant of 3 pi over 3, which the 3's cancel, and it's secant of pi, times 9 pi over 3. The 9 and 3 cancel. That will just be 3 pi minus 1. The tangent of 3 pi over 3, that reduces to tangent of pi, and then minus 3. All divided by 9 pi over 3 cancels to 3 pi, and then minus 1 quantity squared. Now we're going to evaluate the trig functions. The secant of pi is 1 over the cosine of pi. The cosine of pi is negative 1, so we will have 1 over negative 1. We have this times 3 pi minus 1 times the tangent of pi. The tangent of pi is the sine of pi. That's a 0 over the cosine of pi, which is a negative 1. So 0 over negative 1. And then all of that minus 3. and then the entire thing over 3 pi minus 1 quantity squared. So we have 3 times 1 divided by -1 is -1. We have 3 pi minus 1 times 0 over -1 is just a 0, and then minus 3 all over that denominator. 3 times -1 is a -3 times a 3 pi minus 1 times 0, which is just going to be a 0, and then minus 3. And all of that over 3 pi minus 1 quantity squared. So in the numerator we have -3 times -3 over 3 pi minus 1 quantity squared. Well, -3 times -3 is a positive 9. And we'll just leave that over the denominator of 3 pi minus 1 quantity squared. There's f prime of pi over 3.